Right. Well, good morning. My name is Mitch Cook. I'm a retirement plan advisor here at Excel Wealth Management. We're definitely happy to share our next webinar series, which is Life Happens, planning for every stage and surprises. I have Matt Temple, who's one of our wealth advisors, joining the presentation today. Thank you for joining today, Matt.
Yeah, thanks for inviting me. Hopefully we can send people away with some good information today.
Absolutely. Matt works with a lot of individuals depending on where they're at in their life stage. So having some of that insight as we kind of go through each one of those stages is one of those key things that we'll be hitting on today and just kind of planning for each of those stages. As always, these webinar series are for education purposes only. If there is anything that's highlighted about Social Security, Medicare, or any other government agency, just know that we are not endorsed by them. So what comes up when you think about life stages or life events? There's a lot of different things that you could think about, but usually these events typically have some type of engagement that we should be looking at. So whether you're just starting out in your career, raising a family, nearing retirement, understanding how to manage your finances with any of these life events or during those life stages are going to be crucial. Um, a lot of the time, it's just kind of people go through these stages hoping for the best, but it's the planning part. There are detours and things that happen along the way. And we just want to be prepared, whether it is a detour or what we call as a pitfall. And how do we mitigate those along the way? And how can we be best planning for those if we know some of those things might actually happen? There are many life stages that individuals and households will go through. And we've kind of characterized those into 5 key categories. We'll hit on each one of those life stage and typically have a better understanding of what's important in those life stages and what are things of key takeaways. But along the way, there may be some experiences of detours or unplanned events. And what typically should you be looking at if some of those unplanned events actually happen? So we got our first trivia question. Like I said, definitely plug in information in the Q&A box. It's a riddle right out of the gate. I'm making everybody think. So I am free yet priceless. You can't own me, but you can use me. You can't keep me, but you can spend me. Once you lost me, you can never have me back. What is the riddle? It is a one word on this, and it actually becomes pretty important on really the conversation today. Well, it is time. And it is one of those areas that we only find to become more valuable as we get older. And like I said, once it's lost, it can never come back. So when you're a younger individual or professional, and as we do highlight kind of this first life stage, it's important to really set those good habits, setting that proper foundation for savings and debt management. But as Matt and I kind of discussed ahead of this meeting, when you're meeting with younger individuals or professionals, what are some of those key talking points that you're discussing with them, Matt? What are some of those key things?
Well, I think, when we look at younger folks and trying to set goals, retirement, obviously always, kind of the ultimate goal. But for someone in this age range, it's just such an abstract concept. It's like so far away. It's hard to plan. Your assumptions for retirement are going to change a million times between now and then. So for this demographic, it's more short-term goals, right? So what can we do now that's going to set us up for a good platform to jump off into that retirement planning in the future? So it's creating some discipline, good saving habits, good spending habits. Start an investment account, start a Roth IRA. Let's talk about some life insurance. Term insurance is never going to get any cheaper than it is today. for your age, right? So, you think about life insurance from that perspective, locking in some of those lower rates, different things like that. But for the most part, it's goal setting, shorter term goal setting.
And, as we kind of highlighted, I mean, what is their greatest asset? What is
Yeah,
their greatest asset?
time. I mean, we all know how compounding, works for the most part, right? So, when you think about having 40 years, to save for your retirement, getting that snowball built now, it just grows exponentially more over time.
Yeah. And I know you mentioned, term life insurance. I mean, if you want to highlight just a couple of those reasons why from a younger perspective, and then as we kind of go through the rest of the life stages, how that kind of we'll talk more about that evolving, but that term life insurance.
Yeah, term life insurance is cheap. Number one, I think that's the biggest thing for, especially for younger folks. Um, getting, you know, getting a decent sized policy that you can afford in something like this, just from a protection standpoint. It protects your insurability. It protects if you've already started a family, protects your family, keeps them financially secure if something were to happen to you from that perspective. Term insurance it's complicated for people, simply because it's something that they're going to pay for that they're never going to benefit from. It's one of the most selfless things that a person can do for their family, but it is hard to in some cases to make that decision to do it. Insurance in general, quote I've restated many times is, it's the only thing you can buy when you don't need it. And when you do need it, nobody will sell it to you. So it's something that you definitely have to have in place prior to anything happening. So
Yeah. Well, I mean, in your between 20 to 30, I mean, the biggest part is why term is valuable is low cost, but that's where you tend to see some of the higher debts as well as protecting that income. Because if you do start that family, if something happened to you, the worst thing you can do is force your family to move and disrupt them further. So term is definitely one of those cheaper cost ways of protecting that future, as you said, selfless for the family. I got my next trivia question. So, as I mentioned, definitely, put the answer in the Q&A box. What is the average annual expense for raising a child? And this is kind of based on today. Is it one, $5,500, two, $11,250, three, $22,850, or four, $31,450? So this is kind of that general expense on what it would cost to raise a child. So if you want to put your answers in the Q&A box. So 1, 2, 3, or 4, what do you believe? No matter what, these kids are costing us a lot of money. I'll wait another minute here and then it was 3. It is costing us about $22,850 a year on average to raise a child. Now, there's a lot of different factors that go into this number, such as daycare expenses, cost of living, if you're doing college savings. But in general, the overall cost for a child through the time they're born until 18 is anywhere from $200,000 to $300,000 per child. So it's important for us to know that, because as we continue on with these life stages and we build on to that initial foundation in the first life stage and adding those protections, it's really important to know how that sets for the fundamentals in this next life stage. This is where you really want to consider expanding that protection and having the reevaluation of your goals. So, Matt, when we typically look at this life stage, and this is kind of a pretty pivotal one, what is some of the biggest unknown commitments that most either individuals or couples don't realize in their 30s that they could get them off track?
So yeah, if you, I mean, for those of you that have lived through this already, you're gonna say, oh yeah, that makes a lot of sense. But time, is still on your side, long term. But time in this, in this stage of life, in this season of life is at a premium, right? You've got kids to take care of, you're building your career, you're taking care of your house, you've got all these distractions, your spouse, whatever attention they need, all those things just pulling you a million different ways. And you can take your eye off the ball, and a lot of these things can be pushed off, not taken care of, not um, as much attention as you'd like to give them, right? So there's more risks in this age group. Typically, you've got more to lose. You've got a home and a family and a career, and all the things that if any one of those things had a had an issue, could really derail your long-term plan. So what we want to really do here is make sure that you're talking to someone, like I said, Mitch and I are financial advisors. There's a lot of advisors out there, someone that you trust. Make sure that, you just, it's an hour, couple hours a year potentially that, that you meet with an advisor, and, just make sure that all your ducks are in a row. Take care of your life insurance needs, make sure that you're saving properly and just kind of on the right path, right? So
I think the biggest part is that all the time that you had that you can, concentrate on yourself in that first stage, that time is now being committed elsewhere. And so exactly what you're saying, Matt, bringing somebody in to help kind of be that oversight, be a little bit of that financial coach along the way, since you don't have a lot of that time to do it on your own. Um, this is where we tend to see some of those detours, those bumps in the road. And I don't know if you want to highlight some of those things if some of those bumps in the roads do happen.
well, again, depending on, what age category you're in here, you may have, you maybe have already done all the, you found an advisor, you've got an attorney, you've got a CPA, you've got all those, the real estate, the people that you trust, right, that are there to, to go through all these complicated sort of scenarios with you. If you're not quite there yet, I mean, it's always, ask mom and dad, ask someone, aunts and uncles who they use, right? And then you can kind of spread out from there. But just making sure that you have someone that knows what they're doing, that knows all the pitfalls or the bumps in the road that you can avoid, right? You don't want to make the same mistake that everybody else made just because you didn't ask, I suppose. So, you know, gathering up and organizing your documents. I mean, everybody, at some point in time, should have drafted a will. Maybe you've got, tax returns or, deeds and titles to homes and cars, different things like that. One of the other things that people don't typically think about in this scenario is like username and passwords. There's a lot of, uh, you know, we all have several different, logins and passwords for all types of different accounts. Keeping that, where someone could find it and be able to access, whatever they needed, I guess, from there, is pretty important. I always like to um, calculate your net worth just because I feel like that's the score. Like if you're keeping score, you may not win. I mean, there's probably always going to be somebody that's got a higher score than you, but at least making sure that you're getting your high score every, trying to get it every year, get a new one every year, right? So I always kind of like that game. The the overall living expenses part I think is important. It's the worst 9-letter word in the English language, right? Budgeting. Nobody likes that one. If it could be a swear word, I think that would uh probably work, right? So anyway, knowing where every dollar goes is important. If you're just kind of winging it and letting money fly out the door without not really paying attention to what you're spending it on, that's, a big downfall for a lot of savings plans. It makes it a lot easier when you just track your spending there. So, other than that, I mean, there's update beneficiaries and things, but having a plan really is the ultimate goal here, I guess, is what you plan for you can achieve, what you don't plan for you don't. So
Yeah. No, I mean, there's a reason why we call them detours or pitfalls. I mean, this is where there could be more debt than what you can pay for, and that things can get a little out of control. So it's just kind of having some of those focuses. All right. Next trivia question. Again, use that Q&A box. What is the most common thing purchased during a midlife crisis? Is it number one, a car, two, tattoo, plastic surgery, three, a renovation, or four, a vacation? What do you believe it is the most common thing that people do purchase in a midlife crisis? Well, I think the popular belief is a car. I think everybody thinks they're going to purchase a car, but actually vacation. Vacation is the number one. People want to get away from their problems. Why not do it in a midlife crisis? But it is one of the more least expensive ones. There's definitely places that people want to travel. But if you haven't, I think this is where it's important. If you haven't hit that midlife crisis yet, I think exactly what Matt's talking about. Great thing to do is to plan for it. So as long as you got the money, then it's easy to definitely accomplish, whether it is that buy that car, go on vacation, do that renovation, whatever that may be. I mean, those are going to be parts of those things that can definitely help you along the way. All right, we hit the midpoint. Now what? So the biggest key focus as we do hit that kind of checkpoint, it's going to reevaluate and review your goals and start locking in maybe some of those protections. And those are going to be some of those things that we need to look at. But when we really hone in at this checkpoint, Matt, why do we have a bigger conversation around saving? Why is that something that we start honing in, especially between 40 to 50?
Typically, your higher earning years, you typically have, maybe a little bit of your debt paid down, just more opportunities to potentially, put a little bit higher amount away in the 401k or however you're saving. It just things start to open up a little bit. We've been, especially if we've been working with someone for, 20 years or whatever already at this point, we've got a disciplined savings plan. We've got a pretty good, savings built up. We are able to, build on those planning, the goals that we had set and achieved, prior. So again, typically more money is being made in this age range, but really what it boils down to is, just continuing the planning process, just continuing to update and review goals and make sure, track them, make sure we're getting to where we want to get to, right? Those points on the map, I guess, on the roadmap there. The retirement planning actually, when we look at that, the assumptions that you can make, how much money you're going to need to spend, the actual timing of it, things like that. It's getting closer. It's still a little ways off, but it's a little more realistic, and we can actually latch on to some concepts there. So at this point, we start talking about what age do you want to look at retiring? How much do you spend now currently? Does that continue through retirement? Things like that. So we can actually, use some of those concepts effectively, a little more effectively in this age range.
I know one of the things that's brought up here is cash value life insurance. That kind of gradual from term life, now starting to look at permanent life. You want to hone in, why do we start seeing that shift in that conversation around life insurance?
Well, at this point, again, permanent life insurance is a little more expensive. When we think of permanent, it's guaranteed to pay out as opposed to a term policy where it has a certain amount of years it's good for, and then, essentially goes away, doesn't build any value. In a permanent life insurance, you're looking for assets to help settle your estate. You're looking to benefit your heirs, whether it's your spouse or your or your kids at some point, trying to make sure that there's something left behind for them, is really kind of the basics of the permanent life insurance. There are um, underlying investment things that you can use life insurance for, but for the most part, I think it's just more that estate planning side of it.
Yeah, and you tend to be still somewhat healthy. So some of those qualification factors for utilizing this for those needs, whether for estate planning, legacy, or even the income planning aspect, it still becomes an opportunity to look at those options.
Think it's always just reevaluate where you're at. No matter what you're doing, there's always a time to take a look and make sure that's still what you should be doing. And insurance is no different.
Absolutely. All right, 50 to 60. Preparing and reviewing retirement income and tax strategies now are becoming more important when we get into our 50s. And when we do start seeing kind of that shift over, I guess, what are some of the factors when we take a look at this age group, Matt? What are some of those key factors, those shifts that this age group is starting to see, and why having these conversations are becoming more important?
Well, really what we're trying to do, here is we're going to determine, again, we're going to hone in the plan a little bit more. We're going to look at, what age is realistic for us to retire. We're going to determine how much, again, we're getting closer. The spending that we kind of gravitate towards, we can figure out a little bit, more accurately, what that's going to look like, what sort of income we need to create, right? So when we retire, what we're doing is we're giving up one paycheck and trying to figure out where the next one is coming from, right? So the biggest thing that I try to focus on is creating that foundational income, whatever that source may be. We need to make sure that the basic needs that you have are paid for year in and year out, for the remainder of your life, you and your spouse's life. So when we look at all the rest of it, if we can take care of long-term care, if we can create a nice estate plan, if we can make sure that you have a lot of fun money, all those other things, yes, we're gonna bolt on as many as those as we can. But again, we start with the foundational piece, which is that income, and we build out from there. From a time perspective, I mean, a lot of people look at, they get into this age range, and from an investment perspective, they feel the need to bring everything, in and be less risky, more conservative from an asset perspective. To a certain extent, yes, but you think about your lifespan, and if you plan on living until 90, you have quite a few dollars in your bucket that still need to grow and provide that income for you down the road. So from a market correction and being able to to get those dollars back, it does take some time. But if they're 20, 30-year dollars, you can allow that. So that's kind of where we get into in this age range. People become overly conservative a lot, and I don't think that that's really and it's probably a common misconception, but I think if you think about it, from a longer term perspective, it's not just when I retire, I need to be conservative.
Absolutely. I mean, reviewing those income planning options, but I think another part to that is the tax planning aspect. I mean, understanding what those impacts will be in the future, and having some time before you have to start receiving that income, if you do need to make adjustments along the way, whether doing Roth conversions or looking at other ways on how to set aside money, that's where we tend to see, start that tax planning review. The income solutions is part of that, part of that strategy. I don't know if you want to kind of hone in on, why this age group is important to start talking about diversifying some of that assets, that market growth assets, and how that looks, and why this is a topic of conversation.
Well, yeah. So like you said, securing that foundational income is important. And if we can make a guarantee, from that perspective that we know that we're going to have X amount of dollars for the rest of our lives coming in every year, no matter what. I mean, that's a huge burden, off of most people's shoulders. And, to not have to worry about fluctuations in the market, whether or not you can, take your family on a vacation this year, or, put a new roof on the house, or, whatever your needs are. We don't want to have, the market dictate to us, how much money we can spend this year. We want to make sure that, like I said, that they're taken care of outside of that. So in a fixed income annuity, fixed indexed annuity, there's all kinds of annuities, but the ones that we use for income um, provide you with market protection and, a guaranteed amount of income every year. So I like to, call these basically private pensions. Everybody knows what a pension is. You paid into it while you worked for your employer. They're not as common anymore, but you paid into them while you worked for an employer. And then when you retire, you were given a paycheck for the rest of your life, essentially, right? So this is something that you can do on your own through this fixed annuity, right? So essentially, without diving into all the details, it's around the same sort of concept there.
Over the last kind of 18 to 24 months, the interest rate environment, interest rates have gone up. What has that created for some of these older annuity contracts that we've seen in place that you and the team have been looking at?
Yeah, so yeah, like you said, a few years ago, the benefits that were coming from annuities because of the guaranteed rates that insurers could get, the guarantees that they would offer to their policyholders were much smaller. And so now in today's environment with the interest rates a lot higher, they're able to to extend those benefits out quite a bit and offer a much better income, much better return on their products. And we've been able to flip those old ones that weren't doing very well into the new ones and really provide a extreme amount of benefits for a lot of our clients. So we've rolled over quite a few of them.
I mean, to me, especially for those, I guess, getting pretty close to retirement, wanting to have some of these, that fixed income type of strategy built into the retirement savings, it seems that having these older annuities, it may be beneficial, especially now, to have at least those reevaluated to see if you can get higher income payouts. One of the things that we definitely start seeing more of conversations with, especially with those individuals between 50 to into their 60s, is caring for an aging parent. I don't know if you want to highlight a few of those things, Matt, that, just having those initial conversations, what that looks like.
Yeah, so in this scenario, I mean, you may have had the conversation with your parents already. If this is something that it is going to be a good cost, a lot of cost, and it could really affect your long-term, goals for retirement. It could affect your very, very big part of your financial plan. So, having that conversation with mom and dad saying, have you taken care of this on your own? What level of help am I, going to be relied upon for? And then once we know that, then we can have this conversation of how do we account for it. Again, just addressing the risks, trying to mitigate the risks, and preparing or, planning for reward is really kind of what we're doing in the whole financial plan, process is, taking care of things like this, that, we'll have some money set aside, maybe not just strictly for this, but in case it happens, that sort of thing. So.
Yeah, well, and as much as not just caring for an aging parent, I know that there's even on the flip side of supporting an adult child. This has been something that is now starting to become very prevalent when it comes down to the planning, especially when you are, be in your 50s and 60s and you have an adult child that's moving back home and you're helping support them on different levels, and understanding what that impact is to your retirement plan and really focusing in on how long can you do that supporting if we need to make sure that that money is going to last you through retirement. So again, it's not just caring for an aging parent, but it's also, are you supporting an adult child, and how does that look? What to do with an inheritance? We are currently experiencing the biggest transfer of wealth in history. And so many of you on the webinar are likely going to experience some type of inheritance, or you might even be the executive of the estate. And so it's just important to know and understand what are some of those key things when that day comes, what to do. And the very first thing right out of the gate is don't do a knee-jerk reaction. Feel that I'm going to pay off my debts. I'm going to give money to my kids. I'm going to give money to charity, whatever that is. It's take your time. Understand, what does that inheritance look like? If there's tax implications with it, if you do have to sell property, what are those things that have to be done? And then have a professional team. Just like what Matt said earlier, engage with professionals, whether it's a financial advisor, a CPA, attorney, and just making sure you're dotting your I's, crossing your T's. Those are going to be some of the biggest things as you do receive that inheritance, because every person's going to have a different level of inheritance, whether it's in cash, whether it's in property, whatever that may be. But the key is take your time. Last trivia question. What is the average age for retirement? Is it 1, 62, 2, 64, 3, 65, 4, 67? Again, use that Q&A box on your screen. And when you have your answer, go ahead and fill it in. All right. The age is actually 62. I know that's pretty surprising for quite a few individuals, but a lot of it has to deal with from either a health perspective, the job consolidation, but almost 60% of retirees said that they retired sooner than they had planned. So this is really where, every life stage building up to the final stage, age 60. And this is where the rubber meets the road for retirement. And, I think for Matt, a lot of this is really going to be that clarity aspect. So when we have these conversations with those that hit that age, what are, really those things that you're honing in on to help this group?
Yeah, I mean, again, it's kind of going to be reiterating some of that I spoke about on the last one, but I think it's creating, making sure that you've got that income and it's going to be stable. From here we definitely start looking at, the income is going to more than likely, come down once you retire. So, you have opportunities inside of tax brackets for, tax planning strategies like Roth conversions. You typically just have less expenses and, so there's a little bit more freedom from a cash flow perspective on a lot of things. Just making sure that, that we have, you know, address the risks again, and made sure that we've planned in some rewards, because we definitely want to go, check off those bucket list things when we retire. And whether that's travel, or you need a maybe now's the time for the car, Mitch. I don't know. Buy the Corvette this after you retire, I guess. I don't know. But oh no, you said it was a Porsche. I'm sorry. So you look at, what age are you going to start taking your RMDs, which are required minimum distributions. Right now, that age is 73. And what that means is when you have pre-tax money, so the money that you're putting in a 401k or IRA that is not Roth, it's just the pre-tax side, the government requires you to start taking distributions from those accounts at age 73. So if that's all you've done is done everything pre-tax for your entire life, which I've seen, a lot of people do that, and especially if they're in higher tax brackets, it makes some sense for them at the time. But when you hit that age, you have these massive accounts that require, huge amounts of money to be taken out of them, and that can really have negative tax implications. So planning ahead of time to get, to get some of those things taken care of so that we can minimize things down the road is definitely beneficial for you and your heirs. So
One of the things that, we discuss with a lot of individuals is the timing of sequence of return. And why is that important? And why could that be a pitfall if not discussed early on?
well, again, if you haven't addressed that risk, if let's say you retire and we have a scenario where a 2008, for example, when markets fell significantly, and it took them several years to kind of recover. I think actually, if you just took that whole decade of the 2000s, if you retired at the beginning, you lost a whole bunch of money in 2001, and then you lost a whole bunch of more money in 2008. So that entire time, if you've been pulling from your portfolio while it's down, you've compounded those losses and really shortened your portfolio's timeline, to be drained very quickly. One of the things I've been preaching is guaranteeing that income and not allowing it to be affected by the market where, as long as your basic income's coming in, you don't necessarily have to worry about pulling money out of your portfolio. So it's just the sequence of returns can be very, very detrimental if you haven't done anything to address it.
A big part of that is, having certain parts of protected assets where it doesn't have that market risk. Um, those type of income solutions, annuity strategies, do become very important of having that as maybe part of a diversified retirement income portfolio. Really, the kind of the final portion is as you're going along the way on these different life stages, it's just knowing on the important documents and how to organize those documents and making sure that you have that readily available, especially as married couples, knowing where everything is. And so bringing that all together. We're going to be highlighting more about this. We do have a portfolio that we can definitely send out in a PDF that can help with the organization of all these different types of accounts. But just right out of the gate, what are some of those things you want to organize? Well, where all of your savings and investment accounts are. That can include everything from the 401ks to the IRAs to any brokerage accounts. Trust and wills, having that in a place, especially for executors, if people need to be able to identify what your final wishes are. Any kind of tax documents or who your CPA is. Deeds, whether for the house or your car, knowing if you have those in a safe, how do you get that information accessed? Bank accounts, I think Matt hit on the username and passwords, especially if there's a lot of details online, making sure to be able to get access to that. Professional contact information. If you have multiple accounts with multiple advisors, making sure that where everybody knows where that's at. And then location of any kind of physical information, whether it's lock boxes, safes, coffee cans. I mean, wherever you have that money buried, sharing that with individuals is beneficial. Otherwise, you might have a big treasure hunt on your property trying to find that. So what are some of the action steps? Just know where you're at as a checkpoint. I mean, are there detours that you might be experiencing right now? Have you gone through a divorce? Are you going through a remarriage? What is that going to look like? And what are things that you may need some guidance and help on? On those pit stops, do you need to recalculate or redirect where you're going right now? And what does that redirection do to your overall future financial plan? And, as always, engage with a professional. Have them give you some of that guidance, give you that recommendations. If you do want to access any of our old video library, you can definitely go online at excelwealthmanagement.com/video library. We're going to wrap this up. We can definitely set up time to have a conversation. We do appreciate your time this morning, afternoon, going through all the different things to look at from different perspectives of your life stages. Ultimately, at the end of the day, time is a key part of it. Planning, recalculating, readjusting along the way are definitely big items to look at depending on what life stage you're in. Again, thank you for your time.
Thanks, everybody.